Hey everyone, my name is Christine Hansen and I'm a senior at the University of North Carolina. This past summer I had the opportunity to live in London, and out of the many places I've traveled, none can really compare with this beautiful and historic city. With a stirring past reaching as far back as 2,000 years ago, London has been one of the most interesting and complex cities of Western Europe. Having survived through a devastating plague, multiple leaders, and numerous wars, London's past is anything but boring. London offers many things to tourists, from fun activities and interesting food to museums and other exciting places, but nothing illustrates London's epic past better than its historic buildings, churches, castles, and monuments. I found that the best way to get to know a city is by walking through it. So we're now going to take a historical tour through London by visiting some of its most iconic and influential buildings. Our first stop is London Bridge. The first London Bridge was built by the Romans about 2,000 years ago. The bridge was destroyed and later rebuilt, and this happened many times as London was under the control of multiple different conquerors through time. The structure of the bridge became more complicated as time moved on. The medieval bridge took about 33 years to finish and included a drawbridge, a gatehouse, and about 200 shops that were built right on top of it. The newest bridge was finished in 1972. The bridge is 928 feet long and took 5 years and millions of dollars to finish. And this is pictured in the lower left corner. The next stop on our trip is St. Paul's Cathedral. St. Paul's was built on top of Ludgate Hill, which is the highest point in the city of London. The first cathedral was built in 604 AD. Another church was built and then destroyed in a fire in 1087. The third St. Paul's Cathedral was begun and took over 200 years to complete. This building survived through multiple renovations until 1666, when it was again destroyed in another fire. The fourth and still standing cathedral was built between 1675 and 1710 by Sir Christopher Wren, a famous court architect. This cathedral was hit by bombs during the Second World War, but amazingly didn't receive too much damage. St. Paul's Cathedral is still holding religious services while also entertaining tourists during the day. In this slide, and the one after it, you can see the beautiful architecture that is within St. Paul's Cathedral. When I visited St. Paul's Cathedral, we got a special tour that mixed ancient history with current history. They even showed us places in the cathedral where parts of Harry Potter were filmed and also where Princess Diana and Prince Charles were married. The Tower of London, also called Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, is located on the bank of the Thames River, near the Tower Bridge. The building of the Tower of London began in 1078, and it is the oldest building still used by the British government. The tower is actually a fortress, with a moat and defensive walls surrounding the inner towers, royal palace, smaller homes, and the prison. Here, in the top picture, you can see the various places that are found inside of the tower. At the center of the Tower of London is the White Tower, which is pictured here. This building was built by William the Conqueror in 1078. The tower has 15 feet thick walls and is 90 feet tall. The tower is probably most famous for its housing of prisoners and their supposed torture. However, while it is true that prisoners were held here, They were all royal prisoners, such as queens, lords, and royal relatives that were thought to be plotting against the throne. They were all treated extremely well, with no torture ever actually taking place. The last people imprisoned here were two twins that were held for only a few days in 1952. And here you can see an example of a room found in the tower and various etchings that were made in the walls by the prisoners. Personally, one of my favorite things about the Tower of London was this room. There were so many different etchings in there, and they were actually a lot more intricate and detailed than you would think these prisoners would be able to make in this really tough, unforgiving stone. But there's lots of very personal things and different pictures and emblems that people drew that really caught my attention and I loved. The tower was actually turned into a royal residence when Henry III ruled in the early 1200s, and here is a picture of the actual building. The tower is still a royal palace and residence to some of the guards of the tower. These guards are called the Yeoman Warders of Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London. They're also better known as beefeaters. And pictured above are two examples of beefeaters and their different types of costumes or uniforms that they wear during their day. When I toured the Tower of London, someone in my tour group asked the guide where the name beefeater came from. Our guide said that nobody is exactly sure of the origin, but they say that the most likely reason for the name is that in the past, these guards were paid in rations of meat, and somehow the name just stuck with them. The Tower of London has housed the British crown jewels since 1303 when they were stolen from Westminster Abbey. And the tower is currently open to tourists, and they're actually allowed to visit almost everywhere in the tower, including the Crown Jewels Vault. The Crown Jewels Vault is amazing. They have tons of crowns and all sorts of different jewels that various kings and queens and different monarchs have worn, and they have things that were worn in their coronation ceremonies and all sorts of amazing jewels. And everybody stands in line and you get onto a moving sidewalk that takes you around both sides of the jewel case, so you can see the front, back, every angle of these amazing pieces. Next, we're going to visit Buckingham Palace, which is considered one of the most beautiful structures found in London. Buckingham Palace is the official London residence of the British monarchy, but actually their ceremonial royal residence is in St. James's Place. The palace was built in 1703 as a house for the Duke of Buckingham, but was then bought by George III for his wife, the Queen. Buckingham Palace became the first official royal palace in 1837 for Queen Victoria. Today, over 800 staff members work to maintain the palace. The palace grounds include a chapel, a post office, a swimming pool, a movie theater, helipad, lake, tennis court, and 40 acres of gardens. During World War II, the palace was directly hit 9 times, and the King and Queen actually narrowly escaped their deaths. Currently, more than 50,000 people visit yearly as the Queen's official guests, and hundreds of thousands of tourists come to see the palace as well. The changing of the guard happens every single day in front of the palace at exactly 11:30 a.m. If you ever get the chance to visit London, you really should try to see at least one changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. I went, and luckily I got there early enough that I was able to be right up front, and I got to see all the action as it took place. It's really cool because you see this really historical procession and ritual, but it also has an audience of thousands of people from literally all around the world. I was watching the procession with people from the US, Africa, and Asia, all within 3 feet of one another. A flag is always flying above the palace, and when the Queen is there, the royal standard flag flies instead. When she's not at the palace, the normal Union flag flies instead. Perhaps one of the most historical buildings in London, Westminster Abbey is also one of the most treasured places in the city. Monks first established the Abbey in the 10th century, and the Abbey has been there ever since. The current Abbey was built in 1245 by Henry III and has stood ever since. The Abbey was damaged during the bombings of World War II, but the damage was repaired and it has been renovated many times since then. Even though they've renovated it multiple times since the bombing, they still left one little area that they dedicated to all of the fallen soldiers of World War II that has one tiny little crack in the wall that came from the bombings of World War II. The picture that you see here is one of my favorite places that I found in the Abbey. On the lower left corner you can see a sculpture, and it's of a man and the globe, and this is actually Sir Isaac Newton's grave, and it was beautiful. The coronations of the British monarchs occur here, and 17 of the past monarchs are buried here, as well as many famous other people, such as Sir Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, and several famous writers. The Abbey is open to tourists, except on Sundays when religious services are being held. The Abbey was by far my favorite building in London. The architecture both inside and outside is so intricate, ornate, and beautiful that I could stay in that building all day and still not see everything. And everyone has the exact same jaw-dropping to the floor reaction as soon as they walk into the Abbey. The last stop on our tour of London buildings is one of the most recognizable structures in London, the Parliament Building and Big Ben. Big Ben is the largest four-faced chiming clock and the third tallest freestanding clock tower in the world. There are 312 pieces of glass in each of the 4 clock faces, and the bell that chimes weighs a total of 16 tons. The 150th anniversary of when Big Ben first started ticking was in May of 2009. Unfortunately, the inside of the clock tower isn't open to the general public. The British Parliament was first formed in 1707 and is made of the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and the current monarch. There are currently 646 members in the House of Commons and 706 in the House of Lords. This summer, when I was at the Parliament building, the House of Lords was actually in session, and we got to go into a viewing room and watch them while they were holding their debates. It was really exciting to see such a historical act taking place, but the topics were kinda boring. The Parliament building actually began as the Palace of Westminster and was first used as a government building by King Henry III. The building was updated and improved throughout the years and was destroyed by another fire in 1834, but again rebuilt and restored. The interior of the Parliament building is open to tourists, except when certain parts of Parliament are in session. You can tell a lot about a city or country by its buildings, and London's buildings tell the exciting history of the city even today. By examining some of the important buildings in the city, like St. Paul's Cathedral and Buckingham Palace, you can learn a lot about the important past events that influenced its history. Visiting these buildings can greatly change a person's life and also affect their viewpoints on the culture. Next time you travel to another city, take a look at the buildings and try to guess what could have happened behind their walls.